So a little fact about myself, I don't watch SportsCenter. I don't watch any other sports shows. I don't listen to sports talk radio, and I don't even follow sporting news on social media. I would say I get 90+% of my sports news from conversations with people. And if something really catches my interest, I'll look it up. So I'm not a big sports media news junkie for sure. However, there is one source for sports news or journalism that I read consistently. It's not necessarily news as much. And it's the New York Times is The Athletic, specifically their section called Peak. Now this is not an advertisement for The Athletic or for Peak. Peak focuses on the mental side of sports. They dive deep into performance, psychology, leadership, and personal development to show what actually drives the most elite performers out there. So, like I said, this isn't an advertisement for them. This is just, I've absolutely loved their writing. It's been really influential on me. I've cited a lot of it in my most recent book, The Culture Captain. And when Rustin Dodd reached out to me a few months ago for an article that he was writing on leadership and in particular Dusty May in his national championship run, I was honestly incredibly excited to contribute. Like, I love their work because it focuses on the human side of sports, and they just have really good articles. So after my interview with Rustin, I thought, geez, it'd be fantastic to flip the script and actually interview him along with his colleague, Elise Devlin, who's an absolutely phenomenal writer as well, and I've enjoyed her stuff. So I reached out to them, and we put this together. So over the next 2 episodes of the podcast, we're going to be diving deep into the mental habits of great athletes, great coaching, and elite leadership. So let's get right into it. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast, the podcast to help you grow as a leader and build a better culture. My name is JP Nerman, and I'm an executive coach, a facilitator, an author, and most recently, I published the book, The Culture Captain, the 4-level framework to know yourself, lead others, and lead the team. This book, it's not just another book built on the research of great leadership within athletes. It's actually built on my work with over 100 athletes as they developed their own leadership. So you get to experience and learn that framework as you read the book. So get a copy for you and your athletes today. Rustin, Elise, welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. I'm excited to interview the both of you, knowing that the two of you are used to just interviewing other people all day long. So thanks for stepping into this new role. Rustin, I want to start with a question to kind of get us going here. Just looking back at your experience, I was actually really curious. You go into journalism, you're writing stories of great athletes, great coaches, great teams, but you shared a little bit with me via email about your experience being around or being coached by potentially one of the inspirations for the Ted Lasso. So I don't know, give you the opportunity to tell us a little about that story.
Yeah, well, this is a funny story. So I grew up in the Kansas City area, more or less the same suburb where Jason Sudeikis grew up. He's quite a bit older than I am, but he was an accomplished high school basketball player. Played in the summer times, like a pretty serious basketball player. He even played, I think, at the junior college level for like a short time. But his best friend from high school, who was also a basketball player, was my junior varsity high school basketball coach. So this is about 20 years ago, or a little bit more than that, in the Kansas City area. And I actually remember Jason coming to our junior varsity, basketball practices. And at that time, he was just like a writer for Saturday Night Live. He hadn't even really been on the show yet. He was just writing for SNL. So it was kind of funny. It was just, I remember my coach, his name was Brendan Curran, just saying like, "Oh, this is my friend Jason," and he was actually kind of goofy. I remember at practice, like he was good at basketball, but he was like, kind of doing some funny shots, and like you could tell he was a performer. But what you were alluding to was that, and Jason has talked about this, that he had a lot of maybe influences or inspirations for kind of developing the Ted Lasso character. He's talked about Roy Williams, because he grew up a Kansas basketball fan, kind of that folksiness, other college basketball coaches, there's some others in there, but his high school basketball coach was a guy named Donnie Campbell, who I actually played against, because Donnie Campbell was the coach at my rival high school. I
Mm.
went to Shawnee Mission South. He was the coach at Shawnee Mission West, and that's not that interesting unless you're from Kansas City. But what I love about this story was Donnie Campbell. What Jason has said is that Donnie was really folksy. He was from like a small town in Kansas, and he had all these really funny lines that he would say about, like, oh, you look like a cat on a, whatever, like the kind of like funny things that Ted Lasso would say. I'm not doing it justice, but he's just a real kind of folksy character. That kind of character when he's, from the Kansas City area, but he kind of sounds like he's kind of a little country, like a little bit like that. But what I love about this story is that Donnie Campbell had the folksiness of Ted Lasso, but he was like an old school, like Bob Knight college
Hmm.
basketball coach where he was intense, like, and he was a yeller. And I knew a lot of players that played for him, and he was an accomplished coach. He ended up winning a state title. But he was super intense, and I think he kind of butted heads with players, and I always thought that was really kind of interesting that um, you know, Jason like kind of found this inspiration in a guy who obviously meant a lot to him in his life, but was in some ways a little bit like Ted Lasso, in some ways totally not.
Mhm.
So I thought it was I've gotten to know Donnie a little bit over the years, and I just thought it was kind of a fascinating story, like more to the point that everybody has a high school coach that like really shapes their lives, and sometimes you just kind of remember the little details here or there. Sometimes I guess you create a television show and put them like sort of in the show, but I always thought that was a kind of a cool story.
Oh, I love that. I love how, like with Ted Lasso, he was able to take probably some influences as from a lot of different coaches to craft them into like one character that we all love and would all want to have been coached by, right?
Yeah, no, certainly. I mean, and I think Jason has talked about this, but he when he used to hang out with Brendan, who was my coach, and is still a like an assistant coach at a high school in the Kansas City area, and he would go with Brendan to like these coaching conventions. And he would laugh because like everybody's walking around and everybody's like, "Hey, what's up, coach? Hey, coach, how's it going, coach?" Like everyone's just like referring to everybody as coach. And I think
Mhm.
Jason has talked about it, he got a real like kick out of that, just being around other coaches, how everybody's like, "Hey, coach, how you doing?" Like that kind of vibe.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. Elise, tell us a little about yourself. You were a swimmer. You went up, I think it was Division 1 at Northwestern. You have these great experiences, and I was really curious. We talk about how like sports shape us, and you were coached by your dad, and you had all these great coaches. But like looking back on it now, do you feel like you took more lessons from those days in the pool, being on the team, or do you feel like you're getting more lessons now that you're like reflecting back as you do all these interviews and you're learning from these great coaches and these great athletes? Like where did how has your, I guess, philosophy been shaped more so by your days as a player or more now as like a journalist?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say it's a bit of both. Um, but if I had to pick one, I would say I've learned a lot more now, I think, reflecting. And a lot of the conversations, I think, make a big difference. Like, I learned a lot through experience as an athlete in college, but
Mm.
I didn't work with a sports psychologist. And I felt like now that I do this for a living, I wish I did. And I wish I was talking to more people about their own experiences because I think, at least in my own experience, everyone was so in their head, and before a race, no one was really, sympathizing with each other. It was so competitive, and it was such a competitive environment. And I wish everybody just looked around and started talking about how they were feeling in the moment and what they were doing to get through it and what they were doing to perform well. Because I think that would have helped a lot. But now that I am having all these conversations with different athletes, it's nice to just I guess resonate and relate with what they're doing. So like this makes me think of, for example, I interviewed Spencer Strider. He's a pitcher for the Atlanta Braves. I interviewed him on Tuesday, and he was telling me about how he's a really big overthinker and he analyzes every little thing. And that was who I was as a swimmer. I
Mm.
overthought everything, and I think I worked really hard and I cared a lot. And then when I didn't see results, that like triggered the overthinking because I was like, why isn't this working? And so we were talking about that, and then he explained the tools that he was using. So he uses a lot of like external versus internal attention cues. So external attention is the better option instead of focusing internally on yourself. And he, to get himself out of his own brain, he envisions himself as like a third party. So a lot of times, I know Rustin said an article on this. He pretends that he's a different pitcher, that he would like traits that they have. He pretends that he has those traits because he is that person instead of himself. So just talking about tools with different athletes and having these conversations is a lot of it clicks in my brain like, oh, I wish I did that. So I think I'm learning a lot now through all these conversations, and we're lucky enough obviously to be interviewing the athletes that we do, and they have a ton that we can pull from and learn from. So they have a lot of wisdom that probably would have helped me as an athlete. But I think I learned a lot through experience too, that you can't really replicate experience, and some of the lessons that I learned that way too as an athlete. But I would say, yeah, if I had to pick one, it's probably now, just from what I'm
Yeah.
doing conversations. I think that you learn so much through talking to other people and learning from their experiences and when they share their stories with you. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely like lessons that, getting up as a swimmer and you're doing 2 a days and the 5 a.m.s. I mean, like the swimming life, like so hard. Like I never did it, but my sister's kids did it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it takes such a sacrifice by everyone, the family included, right? But I
Yes.
can imagine now you're like, oh my gosh, I know all these things. How good could I have been if I had knew all these things? Right, right.
Yeah, no, I wish I just relaxed a little bit more. Like I used to, like I like talking to these athletes who have the same things that I did, especially like I think it was my last race of my career. I was at Virginia Tech, and I was on like the broadcast, and they showed a video of me and I was dancing, and I had like the best race ever because I was just like loose and dancing beforehand with my and
Mhm.
I wish I did that all throughout my career. Like it was like you learn as you go. But there's just different things that I wish I did differently. But I learned so much. I had so much fun, and like you said, there's a lot of things that I took with me that I feel like I still have tendencies that definitely came from swimming. It's a character builder. Jumping into a pool at 5 a.m. before college classes and then going back for practice later. It's there's a lot of stuff that sticks with you.
Yeah, I just think there was such a lack of information around good performance when we were athletes, right? And I know you were speaking of Brad Stolberg recently, and I think him and Steve are great at like actually breaking through all the misinformation today that exists out there for athletes. I think you all really at the Athletic do such an amazing job of finding things that actually can be of value. I mean, you talk about the crazy things we did as an athlete. I mean, mine was I still remember we played our crosstown rivals playing high school basketball, and Red Bull had just come to America. And I drank 3 cans of Red Bull before the game and listened to Disturbed for like an hour. To say I played poorly is an understatement, right?
Yeah. You learn from it though, and it makes for a good story now, I guess. Now we
I
can
guess
laugh
so.
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so lucky to have a heart attack. Yeah, but like, let's talk about the Athletic. Let's talk about the peak. I mean, this is, I mean, the listeners of this podcast, they will probably know this because the content that you all are putting out is just so rich in advice on leadership, psychology, performance. How did the peak kind of come about in the Athletic, and then what drew the two of you to it?
Yeah, so we launched the section about a little bit more than a year ago, and had been working on it for a little bit longer than that. But I guess the quick origin story is that one of our editors at the Athletic is a guy named Craig Custance, who a few years ago wrote a book about NHL front offices, and it was really more. The book was called The Franchise, and book's more about kind of the leadership methods and the organizational culture, ideas and methods and strategies that front offices use more so than like the X's and O's of hockey. Is I don't know if does hockey have X's and O's? I'm not sure about that, but so he was super interested in this idea of really creating a place at the Athletic for ways that we could tap into, we're doing stories about the best athletes in the world, the best coaches in the world. Like, how do we take those stories and really give our readers something that they could potentially apply to their own life? So a very simple idea. And, we work with another editor, Jason Jinks. And so, for a while, and Elise can probably speak to this, but for a while, I think we were trying to figure out exactly what we were or what we were doing. And so I don't know, we often think we're writing about the mental side of sports, but that can be a lot of different things. It can be leadership, it can be culture, it could be like mental tools or mental skills. So it's all of kind of that intersection of various things, and really just trying to pull from athletes and give people really like specific things that they could potentially apply day to day, like, even if they're not, no longer an athlete.
You're kind of like me. I've been doing this 10 years and it's like people are like, you coach coaches, you coach, like, what do you do? I'm like, well, sometimes it's leadership. Sometimes it's the mental side. Sometimes it's, being a great teammate, it's the character side. Like it's a mix of everything. And I feel like you all are kind of, yeah, I love that you were kind of figuring out who are we, like, what are we trying to write about?
Yeah. Cause I think when people, even just the idea of leadership, sometimes I think, it's hard to wrap your head around exactly what that sometimes even means. I think we know what like leadership like looks like, but talking about it sometimes feels a little like you get caught in sort of just like this weird jargony abstract world where you're like, what do we kind of like, what do we, it's a hard thing to wrap your head around. And I think sometimes when people are like, you write about leadership, like what does that look like? And sometimes I'm like, I'm not really sure, but we're trying to figure it out. And so there's that component, but I think, the mental skills and the mental tools, sometimes that is, a little bit easier for people to maybe understand. But I don't know, the psychology of sports is like, never, I mean, it's always fascinating. So
Mhm.
it's such a like a rich subject to write about and think about.
Elise, how about from your perspective? I'm curious, Rustin shared a little bit about who you are as a, within the athletic, peak and the focus. I guess I'm curious, like, who are you guys not? Like, what are you not trying to write about? Like, because there's so many things out there. And I often find that when I talk to coaches or team, I always say, who are you? And then who are you not? Like, it's such a powerful question. So yeah, what is the athletic and the peak not?
I think we're not a self-help area. I think that was
Hmm.
our big thing when we started. We didn't want to, seem super self-helpy, like we're giving you advice, like here is exactly what you should do. I think like what you guys were talking about earlier, like the mix of everything is important because everyone operates differently, everyone's wired differently, and we don't want to present the same thing over and over again because leadership comes in a lot of different forms. So I think what we're always trying to do is just give you some food for thought and present as many different tricks and tools and ideas and concepts as we can. And if you latch onto something, great. If you don't, then maybe the next thing you will. So we're never trying to give like advice or anything. We're just trying to present what's worked for other people and present stories. And hopefully you can see yourself in one of them. And yeah, I think that's what we're. Yeah, I would go with that.
One of the things I appreciate about your writing, Elise, is that you really, you oftentimes will do the things that the athletes are doing. Like their training methods, those types of
Well,
things.
Rustin has too. You
Okay.
mentioned the Red Bull thing. Rustin
Yeah.
drank coffee like Dan Campbell, so we have to add
Oh,
that in
did
there
you?
too. Yeah. So
How'd
he had
that
a Red
go?
Bull experience like you did.
Oh, jeez.
Well, I learned a lot about caffeine. It's a performance enhancing drug. I mean,
How much did you drink?
well, I mean, I'm gonna trying to go off memory. His coffee order is like two 20-ounce black coffees from Starbucks with each one has a double shot of espresso, I believe. Um, and
Per
I think,
day or like,
yeah, he
just
drinks that. I mean, that's what he said, that he drinks that per day. Obviously,
okay.
Dan Campbell weighs like 260 pounds, so it's probably was not super. I didn't finish the second cup of coffee. I think I probably got about 3/4 of his order done. But I mean, there is like a lot of science, and I kind of wrote about this in the story that caffeine can be really, really helpful in performance aspects. And so I think athletes, whether it's baseball players, NBA players, like they're always trying to find the best way to consume caffeine that is also not going to harm them like nutritionally, or not going to make them like too jittery or whatever. Like I think athletes are always kind of trying to find that like perfect balance of being just the right level of caffeinated. And you see it across sports, but it is interesting.
When I go to the gym, I'm a few times a week, I'm part of a workout class and people just don't get it, but I'm sitting there drinking a hot coffee while sweating. I'm like really strange like that. They don't do iced coffee here in Ireland where I live. So that's my problem, but I definitely would go with the iced coffee. But yeah, that's awesome that you guys get to go really and test it out. Like, what's that experience like for you, Jeff, like to try some of those things out, Elise?
It's been really cool. I think I almost think I can tell stories better, which is why I've appreciated the service journalism, I guess if that's what you want to call it. Because
Mhm.
living through it, the questions I'm asking, I'm like, I experienced this. Like, why am I experiencing this? It's been interesting. And kind of what I was saying earlier too, you resonate or you don't. Some of them have really stuck with me, and I've actually kept some of them in my life, and others haven't. So like Bobby Wood Jr. calls the success hotline right when he wakes up in the morning. Dr. Rob Gilbert, he's been doing it for years. I called it for a week every morning, and it was interesting, and definitely I learned from it. But I can't do that every single morning. Versus like I did this. My most recent I tried, I guess, was the Kobe Bryant, like 10 to 15 minutes of silence every morning with no distractions, no phone. I've been doing that ever since, just because I feel like I am on the go constantly, and I'm I'm working a lot. When I'm not working, I'm reading or I'm listening to music. I'm going on a run. I'm working out, and um, I thought about it, and I was like, I guess I don't have silence, and it causes you to just. I mean, there's a lot of neuroscience behind it too. I wrote about it a little bit, but yeah, I think it's been interesting. I've learned a lot that way, and I think trying things out, even if you don't end up liking it or sticking with it, it's always a good experience, and you always take something away from it. So I have enjoyed that a lot.
We're going to link all these articles that you're referencing in the show notes there so people can link to them. But yeah, so like, all right, so you're 10, 15 minutes of silence. Like you just sit there and just sit in silence and stare at a wall?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah, pretty much, literally. I mean, I sat by a window, so at least I was looking out at something, I guess. But yeah, no,
people are walking by, see you in the window, they're like, "Gosh, that looks creepy." There, you got the
she
mama
looks so
mentality
bored. But it's good. It's supposed to. I mean, your mind is racing. For most people, your your mind's racing, and there's a lot of background stuff going on, and it's kind of similar to. It reminded me a lot of. I talked to Cam Young, and he's doing great right now, and he was telling me that something that he's done is he sits for 15 minutes and times his emotions. Like if something really bothered him about his performance, he gives himself 15 minutes. He sits there, he thinks about everything that, he wants to think about. And then when that time is up, he's like, all right, that's it. So just like allotting yourself some time to just sit with feelings and like marinate in it can do a lot. And that's actually, I watched a TV show, Shrinking, and that's something that they highlight in that show as well. Shrinking and Ted Lasso, two big shows that do a good job of touching on some of this stuff. But yeah, so I don't know. That's been cool. And I don't want to forget to add Michael Phelps too, because I talked to him a while. I think that was one of my first I tried stories I did. He journals a very specific way. He just freestyles all his thoughts and records exactly how he's feeling, what he's eating, what he's doing, if he got sleep last night or he didn't get sleep. And then when he's in a bad mood later on in the week, he like goes back through his journal. Because a lot of times, like, we forget little things. Like, you forget what you ate and you forget how much sleep you got on Monday of last week. And it's almost like a formula or like a puzzle, and he pieces it all together. So there's a lot you can do with these I tried stories, and everybody has something. So it's been really cool.
Well, I'm that guy too. I like read a book and they have a suggestion there. I'm like, okay, give it a go. Like right away. Like I don't wait. I'm just like, try it out, see if this hack works to detach from my phone more. I think it's so cool that you both get in there and you're trying these things out as journalists. By the way, the Phelps article I referenced in my new book, The Culture Captain, because I think it was a great one too. It's just, I think that the power of journaling is just, so influential. I'm curious though, and you may not know the answers to this question. Do these athletes, do you feel like they come to these little, like, I want to call them hacks, they just can become these personal habits or rituals? Do they come more to them by their own accord? Or is it like they have some teacher that says, hey, try this? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I think it's different for everybody. I think, so for example, Michael Phelps told me that he just stumbled on journaling and started doing that way just because I don't want to use the word desperate, but he was almost just like, I don't know what else to do. It was when he was a lot younger, he started this. And I think he was by himself one night in his room, and he was like, I feel so much and I need to get this out. And so he just started doing it that way. But versus Cam Young, like I mentioned, he was someone that took this from a sports psychologist that he works with. And so he was actually told to do this. And if anything, when he was younger, he was saying that his dad used to tell him to do things like this, but he didn't really believe in it until he started, playing professionally and then worked with. So I think it's different for everybody. I don't know, Rustin, your experience with it.
I think that's right. I remember speaking to Lane Johnson, the offensive lineman for the Eagles, and he was telling me about some breathing techniques and some ones that he had studied. And I'm like, well, where did you hear about this? And he was just like, I just, was on YouTube. And I think there's a lot of athletes who are, very like curious people by nature. And it's, easy to find various ideas, on YouTube or wherever on the internet these days, for better or worse. And I think that's, a common story. But I do think that you oftentimes when somebody has a very specific, you know, routine or something, you often do hear like, okay, yeah, I heard this from our mental skills coach, or a guy I work with. That story is becoming more and more common because it's almost becoming more rare for an athlete to not be speaking to somebody, whether it's a sports psychologist or just a mental skills coach or just somebody on that side of things. I think it's more common that they're not speaking to anybody than the fact that they are speaking to somebody and getting sort of ideas, for their routine.
Yeah, I would really quick add too is sometimes they grab things from their teammates as well. I feel
Oh
like
yeah.
that's another one I've heard too. So just the people
Mm.
around them, and I think that's a common factor is curiosity. Everybody's really curious to get better at that level, and so they're just sharing things with each other too.
Yeah, no, I love that the curiosity thing. I remember I spent a few days at the Patriots training camp back before they won their last Super Bowl, and kind of my leadership coach when I played basketball in South Carolina, his name Jack Easterby, and he was telling me like Kobe Bryant I think had come to speak to the team that year, and I loved how like he was telling like the number one trait of a great teammate, Kobe said, was curiosity, like flat
Yeah.
out. Like, was it? I'm always so when you look at all these stories that you all write about these great athletes, that always comes through in there. They have this just deep curiosity. One question I have for you on all these maybe habits, rituals, routines, things that these athletes do, of or even coaches, leaders, right? Maybe it is drink that much coffee. I don't know, Rustin, but like if you could take one of them back to you as an athlete, back to your days there, what would be the thing that you've learned that you wish you knew now?
Wow, that's a great question. You know, I didn't write this story, but we did a story about Buzz Williams writing letters,
Mm,
sort of every morning, and I to his players, but also to people around their program or just friends or just like people in his greater network, and he writes 4 to 5 per day. Very like keeps up a very like strong regimen. And I've started to do that a little bit, at least trying to do like one or maybe like 3 or 4 per week. And I'm not sure that that would help me in sports, but I do think that there is like an element of expressing sort of gratitude and also staying like connected to people that is I found really useful. And I don't know, I think athletes often talk about the like expressing gratitude in their day-to-day life really oftentimes takes a lot of like burden and pressure and like all the emotions that they're feeling. It's like a really good way to channel it into something kind of positive. So I don't that just came to mind. I don't know if that would have made me a better basketball player or anything like that, but it is something that I think that everybody should potentially think about doing.
no, I
Mhm.
love that one. It's a really great mindset reframer. And I was actually working with a coach the other day, and they were kind of coming to the conclusion of the season, and they actually did something very similar. They brought the team, the whole team, into the room, and it was just we're going to spend 20 minutes just writing notes. Who has helped us be where we are today? Because we're in the national, whatever quarterfinal or something like that. It was like let's lean into this gratitude. So it's really really cool. How about you, Elise?
Ooh, 2 things come to well, one, speaking of gratitude, that reminds me of, I spoke to David Ortiz last night. I met him and I
Mm,
asked him, "What's one thing that you do that makes you feel successful?" And he said, "Be grateful." He took a second. He's like, "Oh, gratitude." And then he explained that he thinks when we are grateful, we're able to bounce back quicker. Because
mm.
he and I asked him what he does to be grateful, and he's like, "Spend time with family, spend time with loved ones." So, like you're saying, connect with others. It almost like wipes away the negativity and just forces you to move on and bounce back. But I think for me, something that sticks out right away, I guess off the top of my head, would be treating failure with curiosity. Since we're talking about curiosity, there's this Olympian, Olivia Smoliga, and she was like, "I view all my failures with like childlike curiosity," and I
Mm.
think that's such a nice way to put it because I think I would even if I tried not to, I think subconsciously the failures would stick with me. Like I have got to figure this out. Like I have to keep doing this, or I would just, and I never sat down and was like, let me be curious about this because it is a lesson. And I think my view on failure, I wish was a little bit different. Like I would probably want to tell myself, like, if anything, you're going to learn from this, and it's not that deep. Like you're going to move on, and you'll get better from it. But I think, yeah, treating failure with childlike curiosity is a quote that has always kind of stuck with me.
Yeah, that one's a really good one as well, too. Curiosity, gratitude, they happen to be two of my 4 core values. So I'm loving this conversation, by the way, right now. So,
Perfect.
yeah, this is great. Okay, so here's a question for you both. You get to interview all these different athletes, coaches, leaders. It's a cool job. At least I think it's a cool job. I think you guys think it's a cool job. So you're going out there and you're meeting some people. Say you're at a party, and they're like, "Oh, you were a writer? Like, yeah, what do you write?" And it's like, "Oh, I write, for the Peak, and we do these type of articles." Like, "Oh, that's got an amazing job." Like, "Oh, tell me a story." Like, what is that? What is one of your favorite stories to tell about, like, whether it was an interview or just something cool that you've gotten to do because of the work you do?
Elise, do you want to go first?
Oh, I was going to ask you to go first. That's such a tough question. It's a good question. I would have to think about that one.
I would. Okay,
Um,
this may give us some time to think of a better specific story.
Okay.
But I would say one of the strangest feelings of being a sports writer, and I've thought about this since I, became one, and essentially like in college, starting writing for the student newspaper. There is such a strange power in reaching out to a stranger who you do not know and saying, "Can I talk to you?" And that person saying yes. And
Mm,
that feeling of yes, um, it's hard to like explain, because it's like I know I'm a professional journalist and I know this is like my job and this is what I do, but it still is never like people are so trusting, and people are, like, obviously there's a transactional element where people want, to be get attention, they want to be covered, but that feeling of somebody saying yes to me is so powerful, and sometimes it's shocking, I mean, it can be a famous person, it can be somebody that doesn't, like isn't covered that often. Whenever you get that email back or that text back and they say yes, I it always is just like this kind of amazing feeling. And I oftentimes try to think about like how to like, this sounds a little more high-minded than I mean, but like how do I do like how a version of that? Like how do I say yes to people,
mm,
And so anyway, I just that is probably the most shocking thing that it's hard to like to explain to people, where it's like, yes, I just emailed, I think Elise, this is, I'm stealing a version of hers, but it's like, yeah, I just emailed Mark Cuban, he got right back to me, it's like, or I'm trying to think of a better example where, it's somebody who's like, I've interviewed Larry Brown many times over the years, and I was always just like, whenever I would reach out to him, and I don't know if he ever remembered me. I mean, we probably chatted maybe 3 or 4 times over the years, but I just assumed he kind of forgot who I was. But every time I reached out, it was like, like, oh yeah, I'll call you in 10 minutes, and and it's like that feeling is kind of is like, it's maybe sounds strange or simple, but it's kind of like hard to explain, unless you've
mm.
kind of done the job, consistently.
But I think there's also probably with some of those people, they know your intent.
Yeah, for sure.
It is to serve. It's not just to make a buck. Like probably a lot of media is out there. Like you are really writing articles there that are leaning in and the things that they actually really want to talk about, right? Like rather than sometimes the journalist asks the really dumb question that Greg Popovich wants to like yell and scream at, like, why are you asking me that dumb question, right? Like it's like you're asking good questions on the things that are really they're most important to them, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
obviously, whether where you work gives you some sort of level of credibility. Whether it's a newspaper or like the Athletic or whatever. But yeah, it still is. It's something I've thought about. I remember, this is a kind of a dumb story, but when I was in college, I was doing a story, and I reached out to like Jared Haas, who was the Stanford basketball coach for a while, but he was an assistant at North Carolina at the time, and I think another assistant in North Carolina. And I was writing a story about. I went to the University of Kansas, so I was writing kind of like an old story about Kansas basketball, and they had played there years previous. And I just remember reaching out, and it was literally, like 30 minutes later, boom, like hopped on the phone. And that was one of those like original stories where you feel like, oh, wow, this is like, what an amazing job. Like you just to have access to people and that want to tell you about their life is just like kind of it's a great job.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would say it's like you were saying, it's a good reminder to say yes to things, but it's also a good reminder to just reach out cold turkey sometimes because, like you said, like you never really know. That's a lot of the people I talk to. Like we were lucky enough and fortunate enough to have a network, but a lot of same thing people I reach out to. He was using the Mark Cuban example because I sent an email and he's like, "Yeah, sure." So it's kind of just like you never know. But that's originally I have a relationship with Michael Phelps now, and he's so great in this space and has so much wisdom to pull from. But I originally just reached out and asked if I could talk to him, and he said sure. So sometimes you just have to reach out. And the same thing, I think I did that in college a lot. Like I was notorious in my friend group for just they're like, "Oh, how'd you get that interview?" I'm like, "I just asked." So you can't, you just have to not be afraid sometimes, I guess. Yeah, I do have, I guess I have one story that I thought
Yeah,
of
yeah.
while we were chatting about that is I think I just really liked my Pat Riley test with Rustin. We did an I Tried story, the Pat Riley conditioning test that Miami Heat used to have to do. And so we tried it in person. We went to like a court in Brooklyn and did it ourselves on camera so that we could look back and laugh at it. But I would say, yeah, that was like a fun experience. And it just reminded me of, yeah, it was one like we were talking about the service journalism thing, like what that brings out and how you learn from it through experience. I think that was a cool story for me at
Mhm.
least. I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah.
Well,
No, I was just gonna say, do you ever run 17s? Like that they 17 times across the sideline with
sideline to sideline. Yeah.
sideline. Yeah, I hadn't done that in years, and so it was like such a funny thing to try this thing that I hadn't thought about in 2 decades or whatever.
So, like, as a coach, I used to like torture my players running 17s, right? The 17 touches. And there was this one practice I remember, and like, I'd say we were doing a 17 after every drill. So we might have done 8 17s. It was,
Yeah.
now that I look back on it, it was really dumb. But anyways, I put them through hell. But like my players, I had a few players coming when I got married. They came to my wedding and they're like, they still were talking about it then. You fast forward, 10 years now, and they still talk about it. And I was talking to one of my players who he got a job at Google in sales. My wife kind of gave him a nudge in the door there, but he's in there and he has no experience in sales and he's struggling. Like he's he's on the improvement plan. He's like on the chopping block. And I called him one day and I said, and he's kind of like, he's still positive attitude, but he's like, I don't know, man, if I can make it. I'm like, how many 17s did you do back in, 2009? And he's like, oh, you're right. Yeah, I've done harder things in life. So love 17s.
That's such a good way to look at it too. Like you get
Yeah.
through, like you can look back at all the hard things that you did and it just gives you like a level of confidence in yourself because you're like, if I could do that, I could do this. I do love that mentality.
All right, that's it for my conversation with Rustin and Elise today. We've linked some of my favorite articles of theirs in the notes. You can get the notes to this and every episode of the Coaching Culture Podcast by going to tocculture.com and subscribing there, or clicking the link in the details of this episode. On our next episode, I'll be continuing my conversation with Rustin and Elise, shifting our focus to what they've learned about great coaching and elite leadership through their reporting. Remember, if you found today's episode valuable, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with another coach or leader out there. Until next time, thanks for listening in to the Coaching Culture Podcast.